Hello, everybody. Welcome to the joint virtual program between Boswell Book Company and Schlitz Audubon Nature Center. I'm Daniel Golden from Boswell. I would love to introduce my, how should one say, event colleague, former book-selling colleague, the Director of Marketing and Communications at Schlitz Audubon Nature Center, Nancy Quinn. Welcome, Nancy.
Thank you, Daniel. As always, it's so fun to partner with you and to on nature related book author events. It's good to be doing author events again. So specifically thrilled to host Jack Davis tonight. One of the the items that makes us special is our Raptor program at Schlitz Audubon, where we have 15 birds of prey, non-releasable birds of prey. So tonight, in conversation with Jack is Cheyenne Smith, and she is a Raptor educator at our Raptor program. And she's going to tell you a little bit about the program and introduce you to one of our raptors, a bald eagle. So Cheyenne, I hand it over to you so that you can introduce Valkyrie.
All right. Thank you, Nancy. Yes, my name is Cheyenne. I am one of the Raptor educators here at Schlitz Audubon. Our Raptor program was established around 1980 and took off really in 1998 when we established a new facility and our collection of birds began to grow. So over 2 decades, we have done outreach and public education around the state of Wisconsin, and our program has just continued to grow. So today we average over 350 programs every single year, and our birds help us educate over 60,000 people, most of whom are youth. So I'm really thrilled to be here for this discussion. As an educator that works up close with these animals on a daily basis, this book really deepened my perspective on the bald eagle and its collective journey. Today, our Raptor program, like Nancy said, has 15 resident birds, all of whom are non-releasable for one reason or another. We are also home to 2 beautiful adult bald eagles. Our male Glory has been with us for over 20 years now. And joining us here is our 11-year-old female, Valkyrie, who has also been with us for most of her life. Handling Valkyrie is Ken, one of our longtime volunteers. He's worked with Valkyrie her entire life, so they have a very special relationship. And I can hear her cackling. I'm not sure if you guys can hear that. So Valkyrie came to us from the state of Pennsylvania, where unlike many of our other resident birds, she didn't really encounter any kind of physical injury that landed her in rehab. Instead, we believe she left the nest just a bit early and quickly found that fishermen would throw her fish, which after reading this book and about how many people would have been really quick to do the opposite, not so long ago, makes throwing an eagle a fish seem like kind of an act of kindness, I suppose. Unfortunately, it's really easy for wild animals to begin associating humans with food, which is safe for neither party. And when Valkyrie could no longer find fishermen, she started approaching unsuspecting picnickers. So pretty soon the authorities stepped in and she was deemed non-releasable as she had habituated on humans and depended on them for food. So I'm sure Jack and I could sit here and talk about bald eagles for hours, but as you say at various times in the book, bald eagles are also to credit for a lot of their own success. The most effective part of the education that we do here at Schlitz is provide the opportunity for an audience to see these magnificent animals up close and in person, which is not a frequent occurrence in the wild. So this provides not only wonder, but also awareness, which can seem like a simple thing. But I think in one of the final chapters, you state that awareness can be deep and life-changing. So without further ado, thank you, Ken and Valkyrie. I would like to introduce our guest this evening, a Pulitzer Prize-winning author of The Gulf, Making of an American Sea, and professor of environmental history at the University of Florida. Please welcome Jack E. Davis. Hello, Jack.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I want to thank Boswell Books and of course the Schlitz Audubon Nature Center for co-hosting this event this evening. And I'm talking to you, as I said earlier, from New Hampshire through the miracle of technology. Although I prefer live events, virtual events are pretty good too.
Mm. Yeah, we would have loved to do this in person and, allowed people to see Valkyrie in person as well, but this works too. So to really
I
get
have to
into
say,
it,
Cheyenne, I've had to share the stage before with the other bald eagles, and I think I prefer it this way. They're a hard act to follow.
they are. Valkyrie has a habit of announcing herself when she comes out of the
Yeah.
crate as well. I don't know if you guys could hear her cackle,
Yes,
but
yes.
it's beautiful noise. So to really get into it, one of the elements of your book that I really enjoyed was, despite the many, many characters and historical figures we met along the way, the perspective of the bald eagle itself is really at the center of the narration and kind of weaves in and out of the story. So being in the field I am with captive raptors, we're really careful not to anthropomorphize, because adding those very human labels on non-human animals can be pretty detrimental to their welfare. In your book, you also touch about how harmful this is. So how did you take that into account when writing from the eagle's perspective, and what things were kind of important to you when creating that element of the story?
That's a wonderful question. I don't think anybody's asked me that of all the questions that I've had to address since the book came out, and even before then. Yeah, indeed, it was important to me as a writer not to anthropomorphize my non-human subjects, and in this case, obviously, bald eagles. And I've always felt that way about nature, and it's not easy to do. I mean, it's so tempting to indeed, judge animals from a human perspective, which is really the norm historically and even today, unfortunately. And it is harmful because, for instance, bald eagles have for one example, bald eagles have a tendency to steal food from other birds, including other bald eagles, and not just birds, but other species. And many people historically have seen that as cowardly behavior, as the behavior of a rank thief, and therefore it's been made it easier for people to target bald eagles as predators and for elimination, which was quite common in this country for well over a century. But and of course, Ben Franklin was probably the most famous person to demean bald eagles, again, judging them from his own basis of morality, and condemn them for taking fish away from osprey in particular. And he maintained that's the reason why he was disappointed that the bald eagle was on the Great Seal of the United States. And that idea has been built up into a bit of a myth. And he never claimed he wanted the turkey for the national bird or for the Great Seal, but he did compare the morality of the bald eagle with the osprey, maintaining that osprey was this honest, hardworking bird. But even ornithologists even anthropomorphize bald eagles well into the 20th century. And I don't think when we do that, we have a full understanding of what animals are in their own world, separate of ours. We really can't determine, whether or not they have moral values, and if they do, what those values are. And just simply imposing ours on others isn't the right thing to do.
Yeah, so your book is really kind of a deep dive into that habit that we have as humans, as well as the history of the human relationship with the bald eagle. So I'm curious, why did you choose this particular species in lieu of a lot of other species that we also have very long conflicting relationships with, like the vulture or the peregrine falcon?
Yeah, so there were a couple of reasons. One, that as an environmental writer, I wanted to share with my readers a success story. Typically, environmental writing focuses on the grim and the tragic, the doom and gloom. And I think readers need a break from that. And so there's plenty of grim and tragic in the bald eagle's historic relationship with the American people, but there's also redemption, and of course there's restoration. Ultimately, it is this great conservation success story that I think can be a model for how we approach environmental challenges of the 21st century. So that was one reason. Another reason is that, there were generations, my generation, the baby boom generation, that didn't grow up with bald eagles. We didn't see them in a while. You were the rare individual who did, maybe living in northern Minnesota or Alaska, or maybe one of the northwestern states. I grew up in Florida, which is always had a bald eagle nesting population, although it was greatly diminished in the mid and late 20th century. But I never saw a bald eagle growing up in Florida. And so because we're seeing so many bald eagles in greater numbers and frequency today than what we did just 10, 15 years ago, I thought readers would like to know a little bit about this bird that they're seeing, about both its cultural history and its natural history.
Yeah, I mean, I learned a lot. I mean, being an educator, I of course love sharing what I've learned with people. So this book is certainly going to inform some of the talks that I give in the future. So we've shaped the history of the bald eagle in many ways in the last few centuries, as you write about. Do you feel as though we have been shaped as humans in any way, or do you feel like humans are kind of always the shaping agent when it comes to wildlife? Has the bald eagle had any sort of shaping effect on us that you?
Oh, absolutely. I do believe it. I as an environmental writer, as an environmental historian, I see nature as a historical agent, as a force shaping the course of human histories. We're not the only decision makers in our history. There are other forces at work, and nature is clearly part of that. Conventional historians don't give much attention to the role of nature in the human experience. It becomes a backdrop. It's mentioned once or twice and then forgotten. But for me, I like to put nature at the forefront of my writing, of my books, of the articles. That's what I did in the Gulf of Mexico, and that's what I did in this book. And indeed, if you look, compare the American relationship with the bald eagle, say in the mid 19th century, even the early 20th century, with the late 20th, early 21st century. It's a completely different relationship, largely because of our changing attitudes toward the bird. As I suggested earlier, Americans saw bald eagles early on. They saw bald eagles as a predator, like a wolf, a wolverine, a coyote, or a mountain lion, a predator that needed to be controlled. That was a threat to American livestock and the commercial farmer, and anybody who raised chickens, for instance. And a lot of people raised chickens in their backyards throughout the 19th and on into the early 20th century. And so a bald eagle scene was a bald eagle to be shot. I mean, it's odd to think that, but that was truly the case. This is a bird that's has been on the front of the Great Seal of the United States since the seal was approved in 1782, 240 years ago this year, by Congress. An image that we love. We put on everything from military regalia to government insignia to business logos, throughout popular culture and decorative art. It's a favored symbol of America, but the bird itself has not always been a favored one. But today, in the 21st century, we could not imagine hurting the bald eagle. The idea of stepping outside with a gun to shoot one out of the sky is just reprehensible to Americans. And part of that has to do with the bald eagle. I mean, it's a charismatic bird, and it's a bird we love to see. And when we see a bird in the sky, it's a pat on our back for doing right by the environment, not just the bird itself, but also its habitat. We cleaned up its waters with the Clean Water Act. Again, 50 years old this year. And in cleaning up their environment, we cleaned up our own environment. In improving life for them, we've improved our quality of life because, again, this is a spark bird. I call it a bird that, it's a poke the guy in the ribs next to you excitement. You see one flying across the sky. And it's very much an indicator species of the health of their environment, but also our environment.
Yeah, I certainly, I grew up in a time where I would see bald eagles here, being in Wisconsin, being a fisherwoman, being on the lakes a lot, not an unusual sight for me. So now it's hard to imagine a time when you didn't really see them. So I'm happy to say that I grew up seeing them.
Yeah.
So one of the parts of your book that I really enjoyed reading was some of the Native American perspectives and the stories on how Native Americans viewed eagles, how different tribes had eagle hunters or eagle catchers rather, and the rituals around beforehand, during, after. How did you go about researching that or learning about those things? And did you have a favorite part of it?
Yeah, I really found, first of all, when I sat down to research and write this book, I didn't know a lot about bald eagles. And as a species, or even as an American symbol, or its relationship with Native peoples. And so learning about their historic relationship with Native peoples, that goes back thousands of years, I found very interesting, and I really enjoyed writing about it. I went to as many Native sources as I could to learn about their relationship with bald eagles. I also had to depend upon anthropological sources and from the 19th century and even earlier, and piece together that history. And as you suggested, not Native Americans are not a monolithic culture. Native Americans represent hundreds of cultures, even thousands at one time, and not any single culture is alike. Just like no single bald eagle, every bald eagle has its own personality. No two bald eagles are exactly alike either. But many Native peoples have this long, deep relationship with bald eagles, which are seen as spirit birds, as messengers between the people on Earth and their ancestors and the Creator. And bald eagle feathers and body parts are regarded as conduits to the spirit world. And so bald eagles are body parts and feathers are very important to and many of the Native rituals and ceremonies. So yes, historically there have been designated eagle catchers or eagle hunters who went through elaborate, quite elaborate ceremonies before they went out to hunt bald eagles. The difference between the Native peoples taking bald eagles out of the wild and Americans in the 19th and into the early 20th century is that they didn't take an excessive number of bald eagles, and they did not impact the population of bald eagles. They did not push it to the brink of extinction as the American people did on two separate occasions.
Okay. All right. Jumping ahead a little bit to your section on DDT, kind of a sharp turn, apologize. First of all, something that really struck me greatly about this portion of the book was really the timeline and how kind of uniquely sad the juxtaposition of DDT becoming or entering the market and the Bald Eagle Protection Act happening at about the same time occurred. And were these events happening so closely together surprising to you at all? You mentioned at some point that DDT was actually created in something like 1874. So the bald eagle could have very well gone extinct by the time people like Broly were climbing nests and doing surveys. So was that all very surprising to you? Was there anything there?
Some of it,
that you
some of it
found?
was, as a historian, I'm used to paradox. I'm used to irony. In fact, I seek it out when I'm doing my research and writing because I find it interesting. I think readers do too. And so what we're talking about here is that, again, through the 19th into the early 20th century, Americans engage in a slaughter of bald eagles that resembles the slaughter of bison, and we don't know about that. We don't learn about that in our history. And finally, in the early 20th century, many Americans recognize that the bald eagle, this living bird behind this very powerful symbol of the United States, this symbol of freedom, was on the verge of extinction, and it would have been duplicitous. It would have undermined the integrity of that symbol if the bird of freedom, which we had been denying its own freedom, had gone extinct. And so Congress stepped up in 1940 and passed the Bald Eagle Protection Act, giving the bald eagle its very own federal law. The only species at that time to have its own federal law protecting it. But then 5 years later, DDT is released to the open market, and Americans gravitate to it instantly, not just simply for the control of pests in agriculture, but also in forestry. In your home, you could go down to your local grocery store and buy any number of DDT products and take it home. And so we ended up really saturating the lower 48 states with DDT. And it got into the food chain, made its way up to the food chain into the bodies of bald eagles and the egg gland of females, and consequently they laid impaired eggs often with thin shells or deformed eggs, or they laid fewer eggs. Just as the bald eagle had this new protection, and the population is getting a break from the slaughter, suddenly there's this indirect assault on it with DDT, which was devastating. And I wanted to read you, if I can, mind if I read you a passage?
Yeah, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, I want to read you a passage that helps open up the DDT part of the book. And I'll talk about the passage a little bit after I read it. Let me take a sip of water. So for those of you who don't know, a bald eagle's nest is also known as an eyrie or an airy. And that's the European and the English term for a raptor's nest in this case. So bald eagle's nests, even by Americans, are often called eyrie or airies. And so when you hear that term, in my reading, I'm talking about nests. Aloft in the eyrie, safe at home, were two young bald eagles, 5 or more pounds each, physically the size of a rugby ball. They were nearly ready to experience the brilliance of flight. Their eyes were dark, the feathers too. The spiky ones on their head drew back as if a stiff wind were perpetually blowing in their face. Their legs, feet, and beaks were leather colored, their talons black and long. They were alone together in the nest and safe. At 5 to 6 weeks, eaglets are typically left unattended while their parents are off fishing or hunting, giving the young room to romp and exercise. By then, they are too big to be preyed upon by an owl or hawk, and they have their talons, 4 on each foot, 8 lethal pirate hooks. Eaglets growing into juveniles are to be avoided, not accosted. Yet there are always violations of what's expected, such as when an odd, unfamiliar creature, no feathers, no fur, no scales, appeared at the edge of the two eaglets' security. The figure rose slowly and deliberately beside the eyrie, not unlike a cautious prairie dog peeping out of its burrow. Except this strange creature showed no fear. Its intense blue eyes fixed on the young birds. They backed away to the far side of the nest, beaks open, narrow tongues protruding, hissing. The smaller of the two balanced clumsily at the edge. The odd figure, about to become an unquestionable threat, stretched forward and reached for the teetering eaglet. It jumped. The following youth instinctively opened its wings and, slack on the air, glided safely into a clump of saw palmettos. The blue eyes then turned on the other eaglet and reached out again. The eaglet sensed a grip around one of its wings and, fighting back, drew blood, but could not free itself. It felt something around one of its feet, small and metallic, clamping, but not restraining. The intruder then let go, and the frightened bird scrambled back and away, watching as the blue eyes dropped back below the nest. On the ground, the intruder crashed through stiff green fronds of saw palmettos, where the second eaglet was hiding. Even if it eluded its antagonist, the young bird could starve or succumb to other dangers, since parents sometimes leave stranded eaglets on the ground. The most immediate danger pushed closer. The grounded bird panted, fronds open, and sunlight and the blue eyes fell on the eaglet. It scrambled off, flapping its wings, using them as weapons. The pursuer persisted. The bird was seized, its wings and legs arrested. As with its sibling, something metallic went around one of its feet, but this eaglet was not set free. A soft cover fell over its head of spiky feathers, and all went dark. For a long period, the eaglet was in a blinded, free-floating space, tugged about at times, swaying at others. Finally, light appeared as the cover was lifted off. The eaglet was back in the nest. Its dark eyes found its sibling, and it clambered over and away from the intruder, watching the strange being slip down and out of sight. Although the two eaglets would never see the blue eyes again, every new brood in the same area south of Sarasota, Florida, would have a similar brief but terrifying encounter with the same visitor. So too would eaglets along nearly 200 miles of Florida's southern Gulf Coast and in various places along the eastern seaboard of the US and Canada. Over 20 seasons, 1,240 eaglets would meet those blue eyes. And of course, as you know, Cheyenne, those blue eyes belong to Charles Broley, who was a Canadian banker who retired to Tampa, Florida in the 1930s and started banding eaglets, something that nobody else was doing, and something that had rarely been done as a matter of fact. This is a banker. This is not an ornithologist. This is a bird enthusiast with intense blue eyes, and he did this for 20 years until age 79. Never fell out of a tree. He's climbing in Florida. He's climbing 60, 70, 80 foot tall longleaf and loblolly pines to band these eaglets. He estimated he climbed around 1,100 trees during those 20 years. But when he was doing this, because he got to know the resident population on the Florida Gulf Coast so well, he started noticing, particularly in the 1950s, the population declining significantly, the eaglet population. There were fewer and fewer active nests, fewer and fewer unsuccessful hatches. And he was one of the first people to make a link between DDT and the population decline of bald eagles. He published his findings in Nature magazine and also Audubon. And Rachel Carson mentions him in Silent Spring, and really complimented him for the work that he did. And there are many, as you know from reading the book, there are many who I refer to as heroic people, or I like to refer to in conversation as heroic people in the book, who were really concerned about the species and wanted to help restore its population.
I really enjoyed kind of learning about the cast of characters at that time, having actually been a past conservation trainee at Hawk Mountain, we learned quite a lot about Rosalie Edge.
Yeah.
So her history with Richard
Go
Poe.
Rosalie.
Yeah.
She's oh,
One of
fabulous.
my favorite quotes of all time, which I'm sure you know, the time to conserve a species is while it's still common,
Yeah,
or something along those lines.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
I absolutely love writing about Hawk Mountain in the book. I went and visited Hawk Mountain and for inspiration to describe the place and but I loved writing about Rosalie Edge and Willard Van Dame and so many others who were fighting National Audubon, which in the early 20th century refused to support the protection of the bald eagle, would not take a stand against the Alaska eagle bounty, which remained in effect from World War I, 1970, or at least from when the U.S. entered World War I, and took the symbol of the bird of freedom and democracy overseas while we're killing it. Alaska, the territory of Alaska, maintained a bounty on bald eagles from 1917 and 1952. So you could turn in a set of talons in 1917 and collect 50 cents. And some people became full-time bald eagle bounty hunters in Alaska. And Rosalie Edge did, she and Willard Van Dame and so many others came out in strong opposition to the bald eagle bounty and exposed the duplicity within the leadership at that time at National Audubon.
Yeah, just a fascinating woman. I have yet to read her biography, but I would like to. But yeah, it wasn't uncommon even last year to be up at the rocks at Hawk Mountain, and anytime an eagle flies by, it's still a sense of wonder and everyone exclaims about it. So do you feel like we'll be able to kind of successfully emulate this success story with regards to other birds or other species? So research kind of has this tendency to focus time and funds on these large charismatic species that we're very familiar with, that we can easily relate to, like our national symbol. But many species of African eagles, old world vultures, even the American kestrel are undergoing major declines. So do you feel like these species have sort of a chance at that same success, or what do you feel like it would take to get there, I suppose?
I hope so. I'd like to, share my hope with audiences, and there are a number of reasons why I do have hope for our environmental future generally. One is that we're much better educated about the environment and the ecosystems than we once were. I think we have a much better understanding that the charismatic species that, as you said, are not the only species that matter. Yes, they get a lot of attention. But one thing that came out of the restoration era for bald eagles were raptor centers, like yours. And these are raptor centers, these aren't just eagle centers. And you guys do a fantastic job of educating the public, in particular, the younger generation who are the future decision makers. And I think the visits to raptor centers really leave an impression on everybody, but especially young people. I think that the millennials and the Gen Zs are a little disgusted with the environmental legacy that the baby boomers and earlier generations have left them, and are disappointed in us, and they don't want to repeat our mistakes. So I have hope, because I think that the younger generation have a different sort of attitude toward the environment than my generation claimed to have, but didn't always follow through with it. So I do have hope. But you're right, absolutely. There has to be more focus on the non-charismatic species. Those ones are sort of off the radar, but are, are central. They're keystone species in environment, but they're often unknown keystone species. And so maybe that should be my next book, to bring attention to and a lesser known.
Well, I suppose in ways the bald eagle story it also helped other species. DDT affected plenty of other species. So
Yeah.
having the bald eagle as the poster child, I'm sure, was the best possible scenario.
Yeah, it definitely was the poster child or poster bird for the Endangered Species Act. And when the bald eagle was ready, the population was really ready, as I write in the book, to come off the endangered species list in 1999, but bureaucratic lethargy, if you will, in Washington delayed delisting until 2007. And bird organizations, ornithologists, conservation groups are all in favor of that, because it was this great success story, and it was proof that the Endangered Species Act worked, and so it became really an ideal poster bird for the Endangered Species Act. But also, let's think about 1972, 50 years ago. What in a remarkable year. I always refer to it as a watershed year for bald eagles. DDT, the sale of DDT was banned by William Ruckelshaus, administrator, in a very brave move. Richard Nixon's administrator for the EPA. That year, Congress added raptors to the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. And again, charismatic species that, weren't getting protection, like songbirds and game birds. Also that year, Congress toughened the penalty under the Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act. The Golden Eagle was added to the Bald Eagle Protection Act in 1962 because of the bald eagle, because Americans were confusing golden eagles with immature bald eagles, and shooting what they thought were golden eagles, but they were shooting juvenile bald eagles. And but also in 1972, 50 years ago in October, we passed the Clean Water Act. In 72, barely 1/3 of the nation's waters, coastal waters and inland fresh waters, were safe for swimming and fishing. That was the watery habitat of bald eagles. And when we cleaned up their habitat, as I mentioned earlier, we also cleaned up our habitat and improved our own quality of life.
Yeah, it's funny how kind of oblivious to that we seem to be overall as a society. So jumping ahead to, I guess, today's issue with them, how do you feel like the issue of lead poisoning sort of contrasts with that? I mean, DDT was really kind of a much more intricate, long-standing issue that it took us quite a bit to figure out, whereas lead is such a singular problem that has very obvious solutions, I think. Do you feel like this issue is much more solvable, or what are your thoughts on that?
I think it is much more solvable. And with DDT, you had the chemical industry really controlling the narrative on chemicals and DDT, and parading out all these industry experts, like later the tobacco companies did, saying there was no danger, there was no danger, there was no danger. And so there was, a very powerful lobby in the chemical industry, but also in agriculture, to wanting to keep DDT out in the environment. With lead, of course, you're referring to lead shot in bullets from hunting. And, we have to understand that, outdoors people, men and women, hunters are among our first and most committed conservationists. And they've taken a leadership over the years in conservation, where others haven't taken leadership. And unfortunately, what is happening is that, we use lead. Lead is more commonly used with big game hunting, which is elk and deer in the United States. And hunters tend to gut their kill in the woods, which is a generally good idea. You're repurposing it, right? You're leaving it behind for the scavengers. And bald eagles are famous scavengers. They'll kick vultures out of the way and to get to the leftovers, to get to the carrion first. But unfortunately, a lot of the gut piles are contaminated by lead, and a shard of lead the size of a grain of salt can kill a bald eagle, certainly cripple one. And I think a lot of hunters I know who tend to be responsible people, and most of them I think absolutely are not aware of that, the impact of lead on wildlife. At one time the Obama administration did start phasing out the use of lead in hunting in national wildlife refuges. The successor administration immediately rolled back that phase out. And so I'm hoping the Biden administration will reimpose it. We already did it with in fowl hunting. We no longer, lead's not used in fowl hunting anymore. And there wasn't a big outcry from fowl hunters because they recognized how it was destroying the aquatic environment. Now nobody who goes fowl hunting second guesses, the use of steel shot, which isn't great for big game. Copper is better. Unfortunately, copper is a bit more expensive. But we've made these conversions before. It's not like a hunter's going out and shooting 100 rounds every time he or she gets out in the field.
Was it California that was able to
Yes,
completely outlaw lead?
Yeah. Because it's been devastating to the California condor. It's in really bad shape, and primarily because of lead.
Yeah, I would imagine the condor wouldn't be quite so majestic a poster child as the bald eagle for a lot of people.
Right.
I love them, but yeah, I definitely education. I feel like when it comes to the lead issue is probably the most important thing because, like you said, a lot of people just don't know. They don't really think about it. So we've got about 15 minutes left. I guess before I kind of move to see if anybody else has questions, my last kind of comment was I just wanted to say that I definitely felt pretty emotional at moments in your final few chapters about war veterans finding peace again with the help of ambassador raptors. Did you feel emotional writing that, or did you get to meet any of those people and hear their stories?
I did. So I got to meet Sarge, who's the feature eagle in that section. So Patrick Bradley, a Vietnam vet who suffered horribly from PTSD, was able to overcome his emotional trauma by his exposure to nature and wildlife, and in particular raptors and bald eagles. And he went into wildlife work and has been working in raptor centers for decades now. And his son, who fought in the Middle East in the 1980s, came back suffering the same level of PTSD as Patrick did. On the edge of, it was suicidal. And Patrick got the idea that his son should come out to the Raptor Center and meet some of the raptors, and his son did. And Patrick put a red-tailed hawk on his arm to go take a walk through the woods, and he did. And he felt so. He experienced some relief from this, and he continued to come back. And so Patrick took what helped his son to the local VA hospital and started this program. Avian Veterans Association, and he's this program. In this program, he's matched up hundreds of veterans with bald eagles and other birds. And he has brought to a couple of my talks. He has brought Sarge to upstage me. This is even before the bald eagle book came out. He reached out to me, learned I was writing this book about bald eagles. He said, "You have to come meet Sarge. You have to come meet Sarge." And finally, I did. And most recently, he brought another bald eagle, Thunder, to one of my talks in May. And yeah, so they are very. It's very moving to be beside them on stage, but even to write them and to write the story about the veterans. And, you know, as Patrick says, he puts wounded bird together with wounded veteran.
Yeah, that was a really good ending for me. All right. I'll see if anyone's got any Q&A questions. So now is the time, anybody, if you've got questions for Jack, to pop them in the Q&A panel. I guess while we're waiting, is there anything else that we kind of didn't touch on that you would like to, or any portion of the book you'd want to cover a little more for us?
Well, you know, you were talking about current dangers and whether or not we can do something about the lead issue. One thing that we've, another great danger to bald eagles and birds generally, of course, are wind generators. And many of the energy companies have really risen to the occasion and begun to experiment with artificial intelligence to slow down or completely stop these multi-ton wind generator blades when birds are in the area. And I talk about Duke Energy at their wind site. They don't like the term. The industry, I learned, doesn't like the term wind farms. They prefer wind site, but at their wind site on top of the world in Wyoming, they've installed this artificial intelligence technology, and it had tremendous success in reducing the number of bald and golden eagle kills. We have the way to do things. It's really a matter of the will, and but I think the will exists. It's just a matter sometimes of tapping into it and gently nudging it forward in the right direction.
Right, because I mean, in the end, as you say, it'll probably end up being better for us as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
All right, we've got somebody is asking, are there any current conservation battles that you are following closely, species specific?
I think that, well, there's nothing species specific. It's more ecosystem specific. One thing I do follow, living in Florida, is the problems we're having with Lake Okeechobee, and which drains into estuarine environments on the Atlantic side. It's the second largest freshwater lake wholly within the United States. So it's huge, 740 square miles, and it drains into estuarine environments both on the Atlantic and Gulf sides of Florida. But it's also a cesspool, unfortunately, for agriculture, the sugar industry, the cattle industry, and also the sod grass industry. Many people within that industry are very responsible and engage in best practices. But what I call, many people call it red tide, which is a fallacy. But what I call cow tide and sugar tide coming down those rivers into those estuarine environments is creating these algae blooms, which again are mislabeled as red tide, which is a natural phenomenon, and having a devastating impact on those estuarine environments. And so that's one thing that I follow closely. And there's leadership in Florida now that is trying to do something about it. But leadership has been trying on and off for decades. But I hope we can do something about that. But that, I think, is our big problem around the country, is runoff. And it's not just agriculture. People ask me all the time, what can I do? What can I do personally and to help the environment? And I tell them, stop fertilizing and watering your grass, because the runoff goes into the storm water system, which goes into a river or a stream, a lake, a bayou, an estuarine environment, an aquatic environment, a living aquatic environment. It is having a devastating impact all around the country. And go native. I don't have a blade of grass in my yard in Florida, and I have people come knocking on my door all the time, asking me, who did this? And I did everything. So it's virtually all native plants and pollinators, and people want and love it. And, so change your aesthetic. If you're in a region that depends on a lot of fertilizer, pesticides, and water to keep your grass green, go native and change your aesthetic preference for what wraps around your house.
Yeah, that's certainly an easy thing that you can do if you're not even a raptor researcher. There's just simple answers that can make a difference. Somebody has asked, how is climate change affecting bald eagles?
So I think that, and I talk about this just briefly in the book, but I think bald eagles are less affected by climate change than a lot of other species, because bald eagles have historically moved where the food is. And so if climate change, say, has an impact on the habitat of say coastal bald eagles living around the coast, they'll just pick up and go somewhere else. And there are other reasons why they also do that outside of climate change. So I'm not terribly worried about the bald eagle and climate change. Not to say that they won't be affected by it, but I think there are many other species that are more affected by sea level rise and climate change. If anything, we have southern bald eagles and northern bald eagles. Some people say they're subspecies. Some people just say they're different gene pools. Between breeding season, the northern bald eagles fly south, the southern bald eagles fly north. I don't know if they're waving at each other as they're crossing in the air, but they're used to changing their habitat and going, and they're good at finding where the food is. Don't hand feed them though.
Yes, we have learned that here.
Right.
All right.
And of course, I write about Challenger, probably the most famous bald eagle, who has done more public events than any other, thousands of public events, Super Bowls, NASCAR races, you name it. Challenger has been there, and Challenger ended up as a rescued eagle and an educational eagle, the same way that Valkyrie did. Challenger was used to others. They had fallen out of the nest and have been rescued by somebody, but fed by humans and imprinted on humans. So it's a flight bird, but is not releasable because it's so dependent upon humans. But has been a great educator for us.
Is Challenger still alive?
Yes, Challenger's retired, but still alive, living next door to Dollywood.
Okay, what a life.
What a life,
yeah. Somebody asked, are there still breeding bald eagle programs, or where are the breeding bald eagles? Are these programs successful?
There were, during the days of restoration, there were a few bald eagle breeding programs in the Midwest, in Ohio, in particular, that were quite successful. Ohio had no nesting bald eagles, for instance, by the 1970s, but today there's some 700. It's been a spectacular comeback. I'm not aware of, but breeding programs for bald eagles were not the key to the restoration programs. It was really relocating eaglets from healthy areas such as northern Wisconsin and Michigan, and Canada and Alaska to states without nesting populations. I'm not aware of any breeding populations. Are you, Cheyenne? And there's really it's not necessary. Our bald eagle population in North America now stands around 500,000.
I'm not aware of any. I know there are plenty of various falcon species breeding programs with the Peregrine Fund and Hawk Watch, but I'm not aware of any bald eagle programs.
Yeah.
Here's a good question to maybe end on, since we've got about a minute left. You talked about how you came to research and write about the bald eagles. What are you working on now?
Well, I want to again focus on environmental success, and I am right now trying to conceptualize a book on a history of environmental successes, and I would probably construct a narrative around 4 principal stories, and follow them through the course of American history, and not write them as discrete stories, but weave them together in a narrative. And so that I'm leaning toward that, but I haven't signed a contract with that yet. And if anybody has any ideas, I'm happy to hear them.
Fantastic. Yes, if anybody has any final ideas, just drop them in the chat. Well, thank you so much, Jack. This was a really fun conversation for me. I learned a lot from this book, but also talking to you. So thank you for answering all of my questions, as well as all of our audience.
I really enjoyed chatting with you, Cheyenne. Thank you.
Thanks to both of you for a wonderful conversation. Thanks to the Schlitz Audubon Nature Center and Jackie Davis. And thanks to all of you for coming. We wouldn't have a bookstore without you, or a nature center, and hope to see you at another program.
And please support Boswell Books.
Oh, or your favorite independent bookstore.
Yes, that's right. Your favorite Raptor Center.
And favorite
Right.
Raptor Center. Good night.
All right. Good night.